name's Sidney and I use all pronouns.
I'm Eloix and I use they, them pronouns.
We're here down in Studio G of Hampshire's media basement in the library. Joining us today is special guest, the president of Hampshire College, Edward, last name I'm gonna Wingenbach.
Thank
Hello.
you so much for agreeing to be here with us today and interviewing.
Well, it's my pleasure. And please, Ed, not Edward or President. So,
No, Mr. President, Ed.
Please no.
Beautiful guy.
I know you have a busy schedule, so.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to come down and
It's always fun to do things with students. So, I haven't been able to do as many things with students recently over the last 6 weeks as I would have liked to, given all the other things that are going on that I think you're probably going to ask them about. But I'm hoping to find more opportunities to do things like this as well on campus. So.
Yeah, is this your first time down in the media basement?
It is. I didn't actually know how deep the bowels of the basement went. I came over, thinking the basement sort of like the first floor. I looked around and I kept going down and kept going down farther, and then there's all this stuff down here. It's very cool.
Yeah. There are more stairs than you would think.
Yeah. Does it go down any farther than this, or are we at the?
I think we're at the bottom.
Maybe some secret underground stuff that you can tell us about. But,
yeah, no one's told me about it yet. So it's,
okay, well, let us know.
Yeah. It's like when you become president of the United States, you're supposed to find out about the aliens or something, and it turns out there aren't any.
There are no
I think
aliens
it's kind of
on
like that.
Hampshire campus. Good.
Yeah, nobody's told me about it.
Cool. So where are you from, Ed?
I grew up in Ohio, so near Cleveland, in kind of a rural area, about 25 minutes outside of Cleveland. But I've spent the last, before I came, well, I was in Wisconsin for 4 years before this, but I spent almost 16 years in Southern California. So you spend that much time of your adult life in one place, and you kind of become from there a little bit. And my wife is from Southern California. My kids were born there, so I'm Southern California by way of Cleveland.
So how'd you end up in Hampshire?
Well, I applied for the job and I was selected. But that's the shorter story. The longer story is that Hampshire is one of those places that people in higher education really pay a lot of attention to. It's a really important college, and so everybody who works in higher education knows about Hampshire College. And I, in particular, is a place that I've always been interested in, really in part because I spent the 15 years that I was in Southern California. I was at the University of Redlands, which has a program called the Johnston Center for Integrative Studies, which was founded a year before Hampshire on exactly the same principles. So it's narrative evaluations, students negotiate their graduation contracts. Most seminars and courses are sort of designed in collaboration with students. They essentially own 2 dormitories that are run by a living learning community, and are technically under the University of Redlands oversight, but really they kind of get a lot of autonomy. And you can affiliate as a faculty member at the University of Redlands. You can affiliate with the Johnston Center as much as you want, a little bit or a lot. And so I spent as much time as I could teaching in the Johnston Center and being part of that community, and sort of shaped my view of what it means to do college, right, and how to do it in its best way. And of course, when you're in a place like that, the model for that is Hampshire. Hampshire is the place that does that kind of education at scale in the most prominent way. And so, I've always been interested in Hampshire, and when the opportunity came to try to help Hampshire survive and thrive, it seemed like a good thing to try to do.
Yeah, seems to make the most sense. We wanted to ask something a little lighthearted too in the beginning of the interview. We're wondering, what's your astrology sign?
I'm a Sagittarius.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I don't know what that means, but I know that's what I am.
I'm sure most of the viewers do. Yeah. So moving on to some more media stuff, we have some questions.
Yeah, so you were quoted in a report in the Daily Hampshire Gazette saying that Hampshire is radicalizing its transdisciplinary commitment, removing all barriers across fields of study to create a truly integrated curriculum, no majors, no departments, no curricular divisions, liberating students to formulate questions that have never been answered before. Can you expand a little more on this idea and how you plan to fully eliminate these boundaries?
Sure. So there's a couple of things to contextualize that. You'll notice it's a kind of it's an exciting kind of propulsive quote, right? And the audience for that, as was the rest of the stuff that was in the Gazette, is the media and people who don't know about Hampshire College, right? So, one of the things that's interesting about talking about the new vision with people who are deeply familiar with Hampshire is I sometimes get this question like, well, isn't that what we do already, right? That's kind of a version of like, how is that different? And to some extent, what we're talking about is not significantly different from what Hampshire is in principle committed to doing. So the first part of that answer is, well, what I'm talking about in that quote and in that conversation is to people who don't know much about Hampshire College, who don't understand Hampshire College, how do you communicate that we're doing something interesting, we're doing something that is not like what anybody else does, while you've got their attention? And so it takes sort of too long to say, well, here's this thing that we were founded to do, and here's the ways in which it has evolved over time, and some ways in which we aren't quite doing that as well as we used to. And so part of what we're doing in this new vision is, in fact, going back to some of our founding principles and recommitting to them and radicalizing them. So that all gets wrapped up into this word radicalizing, which I don't know how many people know their Marx, right? But when Marx talks about radical, what he means is to be radical is to get to the root of something, right? So a radical critique of capitalism is to understand, well, what are the roots of this, which are in fact power and dominance over others, right? So to radicalize our transdisciplinary commitment has this sort of double meaning of going back to the roots and taking them really seriously. So that's sort of some context for that. I do think that what we are proposing doing is a significant step forward and backward, right, into this idea that what Hampshire has always done or has always wanted to do is to be a place where the curriculum, the student experience, is driven by the questions and projects that students bring with them, rather than by the ways in which higher education and academia and professors prefer to ask questions. Now, which doesn't mean you can't pursue that path, right? You could recreate that path for yourself if you want to, and some students do. But really what makes Hampshire distinct is this idea that you come here because there's something that you want to know how to do, there's a question you want to answer, there's a project you want to pursue, there's a thing you want to accomplish. And the purpose of your education and the purpose of Hampshire College and the 5 colleges is to provide you with all of the resources and the tools and the building blocks to figure out how to make sense of that question and how to complete that project, and how over a course of 4 years to really develop your skills and your abilities so that you can actually answer this question that you were so excited about, that brought you here, and to do it well and to do it with passion. So that quote about radicalizing the transdisciplinarity and taking away any kind of boundaries that students have is in a sense a way of saying, look, we have to take much more seriously the thing that makes Hampshire distinct. We've got to take it much more seriously than we maybe ever have before, because that's what allows us to stand out from everybody else, right? To say, you don't come here with a pathway, and we don't assume that there is one for you. And if you end up in a traditional pathway, say you end up taking a set of courses that end up looking like what a major in media studies might look like somewhere else, it's not because you came to Hampshire and said, I want to study media studies, right? And I know that media studies is a series of courses. It's because you were trying to figure something out, and you were trying to pursue some kind of goal and complete some kind of project. And along the way, it turned out that the things you needed in order to do that from all these different disciplines and fields turned out to look like what at another college might be a predetermined pathway called media studies, right? But you might also end up pursuing things all over the place that don't make sense in any other framework other than your own, and that should produce a genuine Hampshire graduate.
Yeah, I want to just sort of link the things that you were saying a little bit, because I feel like we did get a little bit off of the original question and you started to answer more questions. Thank you for doing that. But so this plan, like this new pathway, it almost seems as if it's sort of like your Hampshire journey, where you're figuring out how to answer these questions here at Hampshire and figure out the problems that we have and how you can help with all your background things that you've done there, working with schools similar to Hampshire. How confident are you that we're on the right path, that this new plan is going to work?
Right. I am very confident, and there's a couple of reasons. Part of it is the work that we've done for this plan, which has other elements other than the transdisciplinary part. And part of the benefit of the work that we did to put together this new vision, which we're now having to build, right? It'll be implemented for next fall. Part of the benefit of that was mobilizing faculty, staff, and students to actually think together about their best vision of the future of Hampshire College, which I think helped people talk to one another in ways that were productive and helped overcome some of the damage and trauma from last spring. And in order to go forward successfully and be on the right path, we had to find a way to be a community that could function effectively and talk to one another and communicate and make space for different opinions. And so part of the reason I think we're on the right path is because we did all this work together to produce a vision that has a kind of consensus and energy behind it. The other reason I'm really confident about this is that I don't think that Hampshire had a problem. It wasn't broken, right? The challenge Hampshire had is that it had not done a very good job of figuring out how to match the priorities and the way it spends money to the amount of revenue that it was bringing in. And when those two things get out of balance, you end up with the kind of yearly debts and accumulating deficits that Hampshire had. We have to adjust those, right? But that didn't come about because people weren't interested in Hampshire. It came about because we're in a marketplace for students where what you can charge realistically for tuition is coming down for everybody. Everybody is getting slightly less revenue, so you've got to adjust to that while expanding the number of students who might be interested in you. So that third part of this question then is, I think having a plan in place that not just radicalizes what we've already done and is really appealing to a lot of people, but also frames it in this way that looks out towards the sort of urgent challenges of today in ways that are really relevant to hopefully to contemporary students, and wrapped around clearly defining the skills that students develop here, so that people who might not have looked at Hampshire can say, oh, I'm really interested in being able to change the world in these ways and being able to ask those questions right away. And these are useful skills. And then they find out all the other stuff about Hampshire and go, oh, that's definitely a place I want to go. So I think that'll help us gain more students.
Do you see this new plan like affecting current students in the ways that they operate and like attend classes?
It should not have a significant effect on current students. And I realize I'm giving long answers, so I'll try to.
Well, it's actually you seem to be leading right into the next question and following the organization perfectly.
Perfect.
So,
I think there's two ways to look at that. The first is that the new approach, the new version of what we're doing, will be implemented 1 year at a time. So the first year, the Div 1 for the new approach will be built this spring for the entering class, the entering Div 1s. But everything else stays the same. And then we'll have to build a new version of Div 2 only for those students, and so that, so it sort of stays, they get kind of two different pathways parallel to one another. The second thing that's important to remember is that, for better or worse, and it's clearly for the worse, we didn't take a very big class this year, right? So there's this big gap. Next year there'll be a large group of entering students in Div 1 in the new version of the Hampshire curriculum, and then there'll be mostly second year Div 2s and Div 3s. Right? And so that gives us a cushion to be implementing another curriculum without there being too much crossover or confusion. And then the third thing is that the resources that we'll be using to build the new Division 1 seminars around the new model are not different from what we would have been doing if we hadn't changed anything, right? We still need, if we didn't have the new approach, we need 20 tutorials, right? Well, instead we end up with, maybe 5 large seminars co-taught by 4 faculty members from different disciplines. Right? It ends up being basically the same amount of teaching that's needed, and then the rest of the classes are available for students to be taking in the way they normally would.
So there is this number that's sort of floating around, 9 million.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the number that we need to raise?
Yeah, well, we really need to raise 11 million. So there's 3 different numbers here, and let me try to be really precise about this, right? So there's a number that we need to raise for cash flow purposes, which is, every month money comes in, tuition, revenue from the Red Barn, traffic tickets, people who buy board, add to their meal plan, right? Revenue that comes in every month, and then we have expenses that go out every month, right? And so a college, like any other business, has to have enough cash on hand each month to pay for its expenses. And so normally you want to have a cushion, which we do, and then you project out over time. And if you project our cash flow out for this year, if nothing changed, right? We get 2 big chunks of revenue, and one in the fall, one in the beginning of the spring, which is tuition and room and board. And then you kind of spin that down, right? If nothing changed between now and June, we would be $7 million short of our cash, right? We would run out of cash at some point in the spring, right? Now, that's not going to happen, right? Because we are always raising money, but we have to raise, in a normal year, we would raise, say, $3 million. And that would, if we only raised $3 million from outside sources, that would really, we wouldn't be enough to meet our cash needs. So we need to raise at least $7 million for cash purposes. Again, not a problem, and we have other sources where we could make that up if we needed to, but you don't want to start dipping into things like, the unrestricted parts of the endowment, right? So $7 million gets you your cash flow needs. You don't want to end the year though at 0, right? Because then we have July and August before the next big influx of revenue. So we really need to raise about $9 million in cash to make sure that our cash flow works. But we'd also like to have money in reserve and for investments and for other things that we would like to have some flexibility on. So the goal between now and June is 11 million. The minimum is more like 7, right? And then we have lots of other ways that we could back up that if we needed to. So
you're confident this is entirely doable?
Absolutely. Again, 2 pieces of data on this. Our last campaign, and we're going to be entering a campaign, which is where you take your fundraising and you sort of scale it up. Our last campaign, which was a 4-year campaign between, I think it was 2014 to 2018 or something, but it was relatively recent. The average yearly take for that campaign was 11.3 million. Right? So we're going to do basically a 6-year, $60 million campaign where we need to raise 10 million every year. Right? So it's something we've done in very recent history, and it's been several years. Our donor base should be wealthier. They should be able to give us more money. We've got compelling reasons to do that. The second data point is that between January of this year and just the last month or so, we've raised about $9 million in cash and pledges coming out of last spring. And so to do that again over the next 8 months is not a stretch. So yeah, I'm very confident we're going to do that.
And what is that 9 million, like, who raised that?
The 9 million cash pledges that we've got since January. Interestingly, it was several combinations. We had some of it was raised by our own internal advancement staff before the decision to pursue a merger, and then that staff was sort of zeroed out. A significant portion of it was raised by a group called a Campaign for Hampshire College, who is now working with the advancement office, and when they got to the end of the summer or the end of the spring, when the decision was made to pursue independence, and they had gathered all of these pledges and then transferred them back over to the college, and then since then, we've been trying to raise money again as we've rebuilt the advancement program, and so we just recently got a couple of really significant gifts. There was $300,000 raised right around September 3rd, around the launch of the matching campaign there. So sort of, I guess it was like there was a little bit raised by the previous advancements office, and then alums stepped into the breach and raised a lot of money in the spring while the college was considering closing. And then those groups came back with the rebuilt advancement staff and are now collaborating to raise the other part of it. And then we're going to be launching forward now a larger campaign with that has people in our community, in our alumni base who chair that and organize it, and then lots of people collaborating across the country to help raise that money.
It seems to me at least that these numbers seem really big, but at least when we're working together, they're much more doable. If we've already raised 9.
Yeah, I mean it's really not that. So I'm going to get one other reassurance on this. If you go back and just look at the normal amount of cash that comes in any given year from fundraising, which includes money that people give each year for the annual fund, right? So I give to my own college, right? They get $150 a month or something like that that they get every year, right? That's sort of the annual fund. You put that together with large gifts that people get, one-time gifts. Somebody says, I'm going to give you, $250,000 because to help offset costs of running the television studio. And then combine that with people who've made long-term pledges. They've made a gift. I'm going to give $2 million. I'm going to give it over 5 years, right? And so you're getting $200,000 a year every year. If you put all of those together over the last 10 years, we're usually bringing in something like $7 to $8 million. And that's just the sort of normal fundraising coming into Hampshire College. Now, it looks smaller than that in our budgets because only a portion of that is operational and goes directly to spending. And so what we're trying to do, the trick here, is to shift the funds that we raise, more of it into operations and less of it towards sort of special purposes or endowment, because we want to be able to take that money and use it to support the college immediately and invest in making the college better now rather than sometime in the future. But as an amount of money that actually comes into the college, it's barely a stretch.